Hello guys, Miss Kyla here for another English time. In today's video, we'll be discussing about the topic under Module 3. We are down to our 4th week, and the objective for this week's module is to identify the elements of a short story. But before we go on discussing the elements, let us first talk about what a short story is. Growing up, I know that we have encountered many short stories, and I also know that most of you still knows these stories by heart. A short story is a fictional narrative. It is a work of short narrative prose that is usually centered around a single event. It is limited in scope. Well, although a short story has much in common with a novel, it is written with much greater precision. In its simplest term, a short story is a series of imaginary events involving a person or a group of persons. You will surely better understand the short story or the concept of a short story once you have discovered its elements. Now let us discuss the elements of a short story. First element is the setting. During your previous years, setting is only defined as the time and location that a story takes place. Setting is a description of where and when the story takes place. In a short story, there are fewer settings compared to a novel. For some, the setting is very important, while for others, it is not. But you also have to remember that setting is not only limited to a specific time or location. When examining how a setting contributes to a story, there are multiple aspects that you guys need to consider. First is place. You have to consider the geographical location. Try asking yourself, where is the action of this story taking place? The second aspect is time. The historical period, the time of the day or the year. When is the story taking place? When was the story written? Does it take place in the present? Does it take place in the past or the future? And then, how does the time period affect the language or maybe the atmosphere or social circumstances of the short story? The third aspect is the weather condition. Is it rainy, sunny, or stormy? The weather condition set by the author himself also affects the setting of your story. The fourth one is social condition. What is the daily life of the characters like? Does the story contain local color? Or in that story, did they focus on speech? Or maybe the dress, mannerisms, or local customs? And then the last consideration or the last aspect you have to consider is the mood or atmosphere. What was the feeling created at the beginning of your story? Was it eerie? Was it cheerful? It depends on the mood set by the author. So all these 5 aspects contributes in building the setting of a short story. Now let's talk about the second element of a short story. It is the character. People in a story are called characters. Since short stories are brief, there is not usually enough time to slowly build up a character, unlike in novels. In a short story, each character creates single dominant impression. Character in a short story can either be a protagonist or an antagonist. Once we say protagonist, this is the main character in the story, the ones we call as hero or heroine. However, we have to remember that a protagonist is not necessarily a good person. Usually, the story circles around the lead character of the story or protagonist. Next is antagonist. This is the opposition, or we typically call them as the enemy of the main character. You can also reveal the characteristic of a character by checking on his or her physical appearances, or what does she say or he says, how does she feels or thinks, dreams, or maybe his or her actions. Also, we have to consider what does other people say about him or her, or how does he or she react. We can also categorize characters as round, flat, dynamic, or static. Round characters have fully developed personalities that are affected by the story's event. They can learn. Sometimes they grow or deteriorate by the end of the story. Well, of course, characters are most convincing when they resemble real people by being consistent, motivated, or maybe lifelike. The next is the one dimensional character, which we also know as flat character. And the third type is dynamic. This is the character who grows and develops during the story. It undergoes changes. And then the last is static character. Static character just stays as it is. It does not undergo any type of change. So there you have it. That is the characters. Then let us proceed to the third element of the short story, which is plot. We may know plot as the sequence of events. It is how the author arranges the events to develop a basic idea of the story. In order for plot to develop, the main character must come into conflict with someone or something, and then that main character should act to resolve that conflict. Remember that the plot is a planned logical series of events having a beginning, middle, and end. The short story usually has one plot, so it could be read in just one sitting. In short stories, the plot are usually centered around one experience or maybe one significant moment. In analyzing the plot, you must ask yourself, what is the most important event in the story? Or maybe, how is the plot structured? Is it linear? Is it chronological? Or does it move around? To help us better analyze a story's plot, we have here a plot diagram. This shows the 5 essential parts of a plot. First, we have exposition. Exposition is the beginning of the story. It tells us the characters or the background of the story, and also here in exposition, the setting is revealed. Next, we have the second part of your plot is rising action. Rising action includes the events in the story that becomes complicated. Here, we are presented with the conflict. By the way, what is a conflict? Conflict or tension is the heart of your short story, and it is always related to your main character. In a short story, there usually is one main struggle. Remember that conflict is essential to the plot because the opposition ties incidents together and then it moves the plot. It is not only limited with arguments. Conflicts can be in any forms of struggle the main character faces. Within the short story, there may be central struggle and there may be minor obstacles within a dominant struggle. There are 2 types of conflict, by the way. The first is internal conflict. Internal conflict is the struggle of the character within oneself. We also call this as character versus self. It is when the character struggles with his own soul or maybe his physical limitations, his life choices. So that is internal conflict. Next, we have external conflict. This is when the character faces a struggle of force outside oneself. Okay? The struggle outside oneself. So this can be in different forms. We could have character versus character. Well, this is the most common type of conflict that we know, or the most common type of external conflict that we know. This is the struggle against other people. Character versus character. Next, we have character versus nature. It is when your main character faces a struggle against animal, or maybe weather, and other factors in the environment. We also have one type of external conflict, we call it character versus society. This is the struggle that is faced by the main character against the ideology or the ideas, practices, beliefs, or maybe customs of a certain society. Next is character versus supernatural. This is the conflict or the struggle of the main character against ghosts or monsters or maybe superstitious beliefs. And then the last one is the character versus technology. This is the type of conflict with which the character faces the struggle against technology that has become too powerful, or maybe it is being used by another force of evil. So there you have it, the two types of conflict. First is internal, that is character versus self, and then external, which could be of varied types. Now let us move to the most exciting part of a short story, and that is a climax. Climax brings the story to a high point. It presents a decisive event that changes the course of the whole story. It is the point of crisis in the plot. It may be the reader's point of highest interest. Remember that a climax is the point of greatest tension, or maybe the intensity of the story is there. It can also be the point where the events take a major turn as the story races towards its conclusion. After the climax, we have falling action. Falling action is when the events and complications start to fall into places. It can briefly show the effects of the climax in order to prepare the readers for the conclusion part. Falling action brings us to the last part of the plot, which is resolution. Resolution is the part that reveals the final outcome. Another term for resolution is conclusion. This is the ending of your story. It focuses on how the conflict is ultimately resolved and brings the story to a close. Now we are done with plot. Let us discuss the fourth element of a short story, that is point of view. By point of view, we mean from whose eyes the story is being told. Short stories tend to be told through one character's point of view. Try asking yourself, who is the narrator? Or maybe who is the speaker in the story? Does the author speak through the main character? Point of view is the way in which the story is narrated. It is the vantage point that the writer uses to tell the story. Remember that a story is only narrated from a single consistent point of view. There are 5 basic point of views from which the writer tells the story. Now, when the story is told by the protagonist or a character who interacts closely with the protagonist, we call that as first-person point of view. Or maybe when the speaker uses the pronouns I, me, or we. That is first-person point of view. Readers experience the story through this person's eyes, and we only know what he or she knows and feels. The narrator uses the word I to tell the story. Next is when the story is told by the narrator who addresses the readers or someone author assumed as you. It is when the narrator is directly addressing the reader. We call it as second person. The speaker uses the pronouns you, your, and yours. But what if the story is told by the narrator who sees all the actions? We call this as the third person point of view. The speaker uses the pronouns he, she, it, they, his, her, its, theirs. This person may be a character in the story. This person may be the main character in the story. And there are 2 types of third person point of view. The first is limited third person. It is when the narrator who is not in the story tells the story through the use of she or he. The narrator cannot see into the minds of that character. So that is limited third person. Next is the omniscient third person. The narrator, who is not in the story, tells the story through the use of she or he, but the narrator can see into the minds of that character, and the narrator can tell their thoughts or maybe their feelings. Because the narrator, in the omniscient third person point of view, knows and sees everything and can move from one character's mind to another. What if the story is told through the child's eyes? We call this as innocent eye or naive narrator. The narrator's judgment is different from that of an adult. Then the last point of view is stream of consciousness. This is the technique where the author tells the story based on the character's own flow of thoughts and emotions. So there you have it, the 5 different point of views that an author uses to create a story. Now let's proceed to the next element of a short story, that is theme. Theme is it's the central message or the underlying meaning of a fictional piece. This could be the author's thoughts on the topic or his personal views about human nature. The theme, you have to remember, it is built on a topic such as death, hope, or maybe someone's dreams. And then how these topics affects the human condition or maybe the society or our life. So as a reader, you must focus on what is the story revealing about the topic. The theme should be expressed as a statement or a general observation about human nature. What can help you detect the theme of a story is using the story's title. Usually, story's title emphasizes what the author is saying. Another is you can use the figures of speech present inside the story. Sometimes there are symbolisms, allusions, or simile, metaphor, or sometimes hyperbole, which you could use to highlight the theme. Then the last element of a short story is the tone. Tone is the overall emotion or the meaning of the story. Is it happy? Is it sad? Is the story sarcastic? Is it comic? Or was the tone set by the speaker depressed? Okay? Tone can be portrayed in multiple ways through the words or maybe the use of grammar choices or the choices of theme, imagery, and description. Sometimes there are authors who are very good in symbolisms or maybe the sound of words in combination. That ends today's discussion. Again, the elements of a short story are setting, character, plot, point of view, theme, and tone. Surely you will better understand a short story once you know how to look for its elements. I hope you guys have learned something in today's discussion. If you have questions, you may reach me via Facebook Messenger or send me an email. Again, thank you for watching today's video. Adios.